we called this meeting to order, and the first thing on the agenda is discuss and take action on Resolution 2013, consideration and action on a gift to Channel 79 from the Darien Foundation in the amount of $50,768. I will report we are the only committee reporting on this. And my goal is to have all reports out and distributed to the RTM so that on the meeting on the 27th, we can be very brief in what our reports are. Typically like one line. Basically, we reviewed this, we approved it, or we didn't approve it, whatever it might be, on most of the minor, not minor, but most of the resolutions that are here. So, can I have somebody move item 2013?
So moved.
Who said that?
Stacy.
Stacy, thank
And
you.
I have a second. Just wave if you want to second it. Okay, that's Lisa. We have a second. Mike Wheeler, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Why don't you go and explain what this is? And it's all yours now, Mike.
Okay, I'll be brief. Thank you for inviting me to. The Darien Foundation has been gracious to give us a gift at Darien TV 79. Essentially, our infrastructure is the exact same as it was 12 years ago when Darien TV 79 launched. And we would do 3 to 4 meetings a week, and they would just be on Cablevision on TV 79. And back then, Jim Cameron talks about the commissioner who would do the best he could to find the room where Darien TV 79 was not, so he did not have to have any video of his meeting. Now we do 600 hours on 6 different platforms, and believe it or not, the technology is still DVD based, where after every meeting we have to burn a DVD, and it's a long, laborious practice. And so this gift from the Darien Foundation will allow us to bring our equipment into the 21st century. And we're not rotating DVD machines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And one other thing is none of the money that the Darien Foundation in their gift comes to the town. We give them the bills from our vendors, and they pay the vendors directly. When they gave us a grant a couple of years ago, we actually were able to return about $2,000 to the foundation. So none of the money comes to the town. All the bills are paid directly by the Darien Foundation.
Sounds good. Are there any questions for Mike? Speak up or forever hold your peace. Seeing none, we could possibly waive Robert's Rules of Order. And I can ask for the negative votes or the abstentions first. Is there any problem with that? Does anybody object to that?
No.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
So the concept will be, if I hear no votes on this particular item or no abstentions, we will assume that it's unanimous. And so we can avoid having a roll call. Later on, we'll take a roll call. So are there any objections to accepting this generous gift from the Darien Foundation? I do not hear any. Are there any abstentions on accepting this gift from the Darien Foundation? I do not hear any. I will assume that it is a unanimous vote. Mike, do you have that?
I certainly do. Yes, thank you.
Mike? The other
Yes,
one,
I do.
Wheeler.
Yes.
No, I'm speaking to Mike Wheeler. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for what you do on Channel 79. And we do appreciate it. You're more than welcome to stay on, since I know you have nothing else to do. But you can also leave if you so desire.
This is one replay I want to see.
Then you're more than welcome to continue and join us.
Thank
All
you.
right?
Thank you very much for your vote. Have a wonderful meeting. It's my most memorable Zoom or GoToMeeting yet.
So far. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. You haven't seen the ones that I have with my kids. Okay. If there's no objection, I'd actually like to take item 4 on our agenda before we do item 3. And because I think it's pretty simple. We have already dealt with, on the RTM agenda, items 20-2 through 20-8, which were the actual easements. That amount was over 60,000. And in fact, the easements will be paid out of the grant from the state. Item 20-9, consideration and action on acceptance of a grant from the state of Connecticut for the capital improvement program for the intersection, amounts to $1,174,000. This was approved by the Board of Finance, and it was discussed by Finance. So this is nothing more than allowing the grant, the appropriation for the grant once it's achieved. No monies will be spent until such time that the grant is in hand. All right. Is there any? I need somebody to move it.
I
So
move
moved.
item 20.9.
Okay.
Thanks, Bert.
Yes. Identify your name. So Bert. And do I have a second? Lisa, do you want a second?
Sure, I'll second it.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, sorry, Stacy. Do we need any further conversation or discussion on this item?
No.
Hearing none, are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
are there any objections to approving this grant? None. Are there any abstentions for hearing this grant? I hear none. Hence, I will assume, hearing no objections or abstentions, that we unanimously pass this motion. Thank you all. Now let's move to item 3 on the agenda. Discuss and take action on item 20-14, consideration and action on the tax deferral and relief due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to give you a brief overview, but this is a very good reason to have Kate on the phone because she is much more knowledgeable than us on it. It is the RTM that will approve which or both of these actions moving forward. There was significant conversation at the last Board of Finance meeting on this topic, but the Board of Finance does not vote. They do recommend. Their recommendation is, well, there's 2 options. The first option is to allow the deferral under certain conditions of tax payments for 90 days, which would say that the tax payments typically due on July 1st and considered late on July 31st, if you meet the conditions, would now be due between October 1st and October 31st. The conditions are that there has to be a significant loss of revenue as explained in the document. It is both for residential and commercial. The second option is to reduce the late payment of taxes, and this goes back to actually March on certain taxes that are due, from the current 1.5% per month to 25 basis points or 0.25% a month. That would be open to all taxpayers, regardless of need. As I said, there was considerable discussion. The Board of Finance suggested that the RTM approve the first option with tax deferral for those in need for both commercial and residential, but that we do not approve the deferral of interest payments down to 0.25% for the same period of time. Even though it's a 3% rate as opposed to the 18% rate, part of the discussion is that psychologically certain taxpayers might be just decide that it's easy to defer that taxes, thinking that they're going to earn more than 3%. Kate, I know you're on the phone. Do you want to give a little bit more explanation on the first deferral?
Okay, so the first deferral, we had two options. We could make it accessible to all taxpayers, or we could make it accessible to only those who qualified with, they have to document loss of revenue, loss of income for residential property taxpayers. They would have to show that they'd been furloughed, had a reduction in their hours, or had become unemployed since March 10th. Similar restrictions for commercial taxpayers, they would have to show loss of revenue of 30% compared to the prior year, or we could leave it unrestricted. Our recommendation from Jennifer Charneski and myself was that we go with the eligible taxpayers. The feeling was that if we opened it to everyone, we would have a serious cash flow issue in the first 3 months of the year. Because why wouldn't people take advantage of the opportunity to delay whether they had any income loss or not? Do you want to talk about the low interest rate as well?
I just want to add something. During the meeting, Jen had done some research, and I believe someplace in the range of 30%, 37%, but definitely more than 30% of our taxpayers have their taxes escrow. And so we anticipate that the mortgage banks would be paying us at least that amount of what they already have escrowed.
Right, and if your taxes are
That
escrowed,
being said, it's 37% of the household, I believe, not 37% of the tax liability due.
no, it's 30% of the taxes.
Okay, all right, that's good. All right.
And that's, you know, if you're escrowed, you're not eligible, period.
All right. So yes, why don't you now cover the other interest alternative?
Right, the low rate alternative, similar, it would have dropped the interest to 0.25% per month for the first 3 months, and that would be for everyone. And again, we felt that that was, it was too broad, that it would allow taxpayers who had not suffered any loss to take advantage, and that it could put the town in a serious cash crunch if we did that. So our recommendation is not to do that one.
Are there any questions?
Kate, it's Mike Heights, and I just have probably a really basic question, and that is the low interest feature that you're deciding not to suggest, as well as limiting the other deferral program to qualifying residents. That's all consistent with the governor's orders. Is that correct?
Right. So the governor's order said we have to adopt one or both, but we have to adopt at least one. And those,
Yes.
the Office of Policy and Management was the one who developed the guidelines for eligibility, and that was done in accordance with the governor's executive order.
And do you have a sense as to what our neighboring towns are doing?
It varies. There are a number who are exempting everybody, and there are a number who are not. Some of it may be, you know, it's going to be administratively a little bit difficult because we will have to require people to provide some documentation Westport, I spoke with Westport, and they are requiring people provide a letter that says they were furloughed or their pink slip. So it shouldn't be too onerous, but it will create some issues for the tax office in terms of, you have an August 1st date, somebody who had income loss, they have an October 1st date. So there will be some issues administratively.
Thank you, Kate.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Kate. Suppose we were to do the more general option. Do we know how much money would be affected, and if the Treasury has enough liquidity, if the RTM were to adopt that broader measure, if the town has enough liquidity to withstand it?
Well, Bert, that was our concern with offering the broad one, was that we would not have enough liquidity. July is one of our biggest cash draw months. So if we are without our normal stream of income for 3 months, we might have to issue tax anticipation notes.
And I'm gonna insert something here which we will discuss in greater detail later. When we're going to be talking about the executive orders, one of my big concerns from a budget perspective is Executive Order 7S, which limits the issuance of tax anticipation notes or bonding to 1% of the prior year's budget. So just assuming that, using round terms, let me add something else. At the last item in the budget resolution that we do has always authorized the Board of Finance to borrow up to $5 million on tax anticipation notes. On a meeting held July 7th with Jamie, Kate, Jen, JZ, Wayne, Seth, myself, and Clara, I suggested that it might not be a bad idea if we increase the 5 million to 10 million, or 5 million to a number. Jen suggested 10 million, which was agreed to by everyone. The problem is that based upon 7S, double bullet 2 and double bullet 3, the Board of Finance would be limited to approximately $1.5 million cumulatively for fixed asset bonding and for tax anticipation notes without going back to the RTM. So my concerns are that if we make it available to everyone and we don't have significant increase in the capability of tax anticipation notes for the town, that we are putting the, we are taking away a significant tool for the town. Just as a point of reference, that, with the analysis that was done by Jen and presented at the Board of Finance meeting, we are somewhat hamstruck if we do put it for everyone, and therefore, and then have a cash flow situation. So, and I apologize. Dog is barking at the chipmunks.
It was the resolution that we're discussing right now. It seems pretty obvious to me that we need to define the beneficiary of that possible deferral of taxes very narrowly to those people who are eligible and are really in need, not only because the taxes, I think, for the people in need are a burden, and maybe not for everyone. It's just an arbitrage to think that we have a 3% deferral rate. And the intent of the whole thing had been to be an economic help for everybody. So my view is that we should do what the Board of Finance has recommended.
Yeah, I'll also add that even if we were to increase if we were able to, or we subsequently were able to increase a tax anticipation note, if I just use the 3%, which is one of our the bond costs for the last, the town would be incurring whatever that dollar amount is for 3 months, whatever the going market rate is. So there would be an incremental expense to the town for that. So, which is currently not in the budget. So, at least as it was presented. So, I tend to agree with Bert. I agree with the recommendation from Kate and Jen as well. Is there any other perspective or point of view that somebody wishes to either ask or make?
Just a quick question. What about the ones that escrow but have defaulted in their mortgage and are self-employed? Are they eligible?
Can you say that again? It didn't come through clearly. I apologize.
If somebody has already defaulted in their mortgage, are they eligible? And if they are self-employed, just a letter saying, I don't have revenue?
So I'm going to guess with that situation, somebody who's self-employed would have to show that their revenue has decreased in the same way that a business would compared to the prior year. One important thing that you kind of raised there, if somebody was already delinquent, if they didn't make their January installment, they don't get relief from that. It's only situations that have occurred since March 10th.
Okay. So if they defaulted in their March or April, and they used to escrow, are they eligible?
If they used to escrow?
Yes.
If they're no longer escrowing, I believe they'd be eligible if they can show the income loss.
Okay.
I would also say that in cases, typically if somebody has a mortgage for which the taxes were escrowed and they did not make a tax payment, typically mortgage companies, having been involved in banking, will still make that tax payment and settle the difference with the person who, between them and the mortgagee. All right. So we would still anticipate, if the taxes were supposed to be escrowed, that the mortgage company will be making that payment.
Okay. Thank you.
So, are there any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. Just, I guess Kate could just re-explain how the interest rate works. Yeah, so maybe I've gotten this wrong, but I just want to understand, when that gets applied. At the end of the day, all of this is just a deferral, and they owe all of this ultimately now with an interest addition, right?
Well, no. So what we're proposing is that for people who are eligible, that their tax payment, the July payment, is not due until October 1st. So you have 30 days from the date of the billing. In a normal year, your July 2020 tax bill would be due August 3rd. August 4th, you would start paying interest. What this is saying is they'll have until October 1st to pay with no interest.
Okay.
If they don't pay by October 1st, then interest starts accruing at that point.
Well,
Wait, but
Kate, quick,
what's the
wait,
October 1st date then?
wait, yeah, I just want to get a clarification. I thought it was for 90 days, which would say that we give everyone a 30-day coverage. So typically, if something is due October 1st, wouldn't they have until October
No.
30th on this?
No, because
Okay.
it's due July 1st. So they're 30 days. We're typically giving them 30 days, which business calendar wise and all that works out to August 3rd. We're going to give them 90 days, which brings it to October 1st. So if you haven't paid, if you were eligible and you haven't paid your taxes by October 1st,
So
you will be delinquent.
it's just,
And at that time, the interest rate will
So
be.
it's an additional 60 days.
Yes, it is an additional 60 days over what we normally allow.
Thank you. That clarifies.
Kate, do they
Any
have
other-
to apply for this within the 30 days? The first 30, the month of July? How does that work?
I will have to go back and read the executive order or read the guidance rather, but I think we can open up the application. Once it's approved, we can open up the application process. And I'm gonna guess they would have to make their application no later than August 3rd. But that is an administrative detail we'll have to work out.
Go out with the tax notices? I mean, how will people know that they have this to do?
That's a good question. We're going to have to do some education. And yes, it might be something that we put in the tax bills.
Okay.
I have a
Okay.
procedural question.
It's
Sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
This is Jenny. I have a question, Kate, just to on the scenario we're looking at that we're looking to adopt. With the deferral rate, am I correct in understanding we're assuming a deferral rate of 5%? Did I understand that right?
That was our original assumption, was that 5% of the property owners would defer.
Did we run any sensitivity analyses to see what happens if that rate, I know that is based on past experience from what I understand, but we're in a different territory. Did Jen happen to look at what happens if it's higher than 5%, what that does on our liquidity?
I don't believe she did. We did talk about going as high as an estimate of 10%. I'd have to go look through and see if she ran those numbers.
I think that Jen did discuss that and said that, depending upon what was necessary, when we would start to feel a liquidity squeeze on this, if the taxes weren't done. And I believe it ends up being like in the November timeframe, if it ends up being at a 5 or 10% amount. I could be wrong, but that's what I thought was discussed at the Board of Finance meeting. I know there's others who watched that. Stacy, I believe you watched that as well. Did you come away with a similar opinion?
Yes. I had a
Okay.
procedural question. I thought the resolution said that we needed to have our vote submitted to the governor's office on the 25th, and the RTM's not meeting till the 27th. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so that was fun. So I have a contact at OPM, thanks to a committee that I chair for the state. And between Jamie reached out directly to the secretary of OPM, and I reached out to my contacts, and we were notified this afternoon that the state has given us until the 29th.
Great.
Super, thank you.
great.
Yes, we jointly raised that with Seth, and Wayne and everybody got quickly on that. So Kate, thank you for that. I know that Jamie had sent a letter as well. That is good, because otherwise there would have been a special meeting on Thursday of the RTM to approve whatever we're going to be recommending tonight. Are there any other questions? Seeing none on this particular one,
Could we have somebody move this, Jack?
yes, that's what we're going to be doing. Can I have somebody move this resolution?
I'll be happy to move.
Okay, and for a second?
Second.
Stacy?
Oh,
Yeah.
let me see what I'm moving. I'm saying that we should adopt the narrow definition where
That is correct.
That's right.
we only support the people in economic hardship and don't offer the option up to everybody.
As well as not offering the option for a reduction in the interest.
That's right.
Okay. Stacy, you still want to move that? Second that, rather?
Second.
Okay, thank you. We can do sort of a voice vote on this. All in favor, just yell aye.
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 Are there any abstentions? Are there any
A lot
no
of people are
votes?
muted. Wait, there's a lot of people muted, so you couldn't hear their
Oh.
eyes. Do we care?
It's based, I mean, it's, what happens is theoretically.
I just unmuted. I am an aye.
their
I am not a no.
Beyond the.
Okay. In theory, what happens is if I don't hear any no's or I don't hear any abstentions, we're going to assume it's unanimous. So I will state that unless I hear a no or an abstention by somebody unmuting themselves, that this is passing unanimous to recommend to the RTM that we adopt the deferral of taxes for those that are need both residential and commercial in accordance to the guidelines set forth by the governor, and that we are not recommending it be open to all people, nor are we recommending the interest deferral. F&B is the only committee that will be reporting on this. So I will do a write-up, I will pass it by Kate, and then we will distribute it.
Thank you, Jack.
Passing it by Kate to make sure that what we're saying is accurate. Okay? Next topic. We are now going to deal or address, and unfortunately Wayne is not on, the resolution of the representative town meeting to authorize the Board of Finance to adopt a budget for the July 1st through 2020 through June 30th, 2021 fiscal year. There are a couple of areas that I think we should be discussing, and hopefully we will discuss them individually. I think there is a need to discuss Executive Order B, Executive Order, 7B, Executive Order 7I, and Executive Order 7S. I also think that there is a need, and as has been my experience with dealing with attorneys, and in fact, I did cover this with Wayne earlier this afternoon, to understand what the potential legal risks are, regardless of the vote on both sides, whether or not it's approved or whether or not it's not approved. And we'll have that discussion at the end. I was initially going to have it earlier, but I think I've decided to have it at the end. So I want to open up the, I believe everyone has seen, so we don't need to reiterate it. Everybody has seen the position, legal opinion of Wayne, that the legislative body shall move and pardon me for using this words, cede their authority in the budget making process to the Board of Finance. All right. So I'm hopeful that everybody has read that, so we don't need to go over it. Yeah. I'm now opening up for discussion on 7I. Is there anyone who would like to speak on that?
Yeah, I would, whoever, if I may.
Yep, that's Peter.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
I do want to, pardon me, Peter, for cutting you off. Anything that's being read or any documentation that's referenced, them all to be passed on to Mike Heights to be included in our, as well as passing it on to any other body that may so desire to have it. So if there's something in writing that you're reading off of and you want it in the record, please do that so we are complying with what would have been a packet for this.
Yeah.
Okay, Peter, back to you.
Thank you. And just for the record, a couple things. There is a written document that I prepared that memorializes everything that I'm going to go into right now, and I will not read off of it for the whole thing. It's about 3 pages, and I don't want to bore anybody reading from anything that's written, but I will outline the ideas here. Then the one caveat I have to do is, while I am a licensed attorney in Connecticut, I'm not representing the RTM. I'm not representing this committee in a formal legal capacity. That raises some issues we can talk about later on. But the real the gist of this is that I wholeheartedly, completely disagree with Wayne Fox's interpretation of Executive Order 7I, paragraph 13. We can go into this technically, but the plain meaning of this language clearly shows that it is the RTM's budget authority that should be kept, and that not only should be kept, but we should proceed with our authority pursuant to Executive Order 7B. You know, Executive Order 7B says that we can use technology to do our business. That's the oversimplification. There are some requirements there that are important. I'm sure we can, we can abide by those. But the charter, the town charter says that we are the legislative authority for the legislative body of the town. That's a quote. COVID-19 has caused us all sorts of problems. We understand that. Governor Lamont's executive orders address how we can deal with these so that we can do our business efficiently and effectively under public health guidelines. They're meant to be a help to our town, other towns, and not a hindrance. Now, therefore, if there are towns that have, for example, full town meetings, which are large groups, large gatherings, in that situation, the Board of Selectmen shall authorize that authority shall take that authority away from a town meeting and move forward on its own. However, the language clearly says that it's the legislative authority resides with the legislative body unless it's the legislative body is a town meeting. If the legislative body is not a town meeting, Gary Ann, it is the legislative body says shall authorize. There's a comma if you look at 4 lines down from, and let me say, I did forward this memo to Mike before our meeting started. I hope you will forward this to everybody else. But if you look at the text of the 7I, paragraph 13, in the 4th line, it says the Board of Selectmen, comma, shall authorize. Well, that comma means that it refers back to the authorization refers back to the legislative body, not to the Board of Selectmen. Okay, and we'll discuss some additional reasons why that's controlling. Again, the only situation that this provides for the Board of Selectmen to take this authority away from us, or where we should relinquish it, is if if Darien had a full town meeting. We don't. We're the RTM. We have an RTM. This provision does not apply. So we should proceed with our budget in due course. Okay. Now, just as an aside, this reading of this is supported by the fact that the legislative body of a municipality, later on in that very same paragraph, says that in so acting, the budget making authority of the municipality shall comply with public meeting requirements consistent with Executive Order 7B. And that's this section which authorizes us to do business exactly how we're doing it right now. So, in addition, the governor released last Friday, so the 17th, frequently asked questions, which is absolutely completely on point with this interpretation, and in my mind is dispositive. It refers to Executive Order 7I, and it says, and then that Executive Order 7I applies only to in-person votes of residents or taxpayer, whether a referendum or town meeting. It doesn't relieve the relevant municipal body, us, from the obligations to vote, record its vote, and follow FOIA laws as amended by Executive Order 7B. So it seems fairly clear to me that based on the governor's own language, which to finish us, as towns should still use provisions to hold any budget presentation meetings or other proceedings as required by law. So I fully disagree with Wayne. I think in all good faith, he's reading this completely differently, but I don't think that it is dispositive. I think what's dispositive is the concept that when the legislative body is a town meeting, other than a representative town meeting, that's what applies, and that's not us. Okay? We are the legislative body. We are not a town meeting. So what 7I and 7S, and 7S more or less says the same thing. It's also interesting.
Can we hold off on 7S at this time?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So, Wayne has advised to the contrary. And he said we have to comply with the directives and orders by the governor. I agree completely. We have to comply with the orders of the governor, but the governor is telling us that we can go ahead and do our business in the normal course as long as we have relevant technical meetings to comply with, with our social distancing obligations to the state and to our country. And that is the correct reading of this language. Again, if you want to talk about where the comma is and what that refers to, there are two separate clauses. One clause is when the legislative body is not a town meeting, and in the other situation where it is a town meeting, that's where the selectmen have the authority to proceed with the budget. And for me, and when you look at this in light of the public health requirements in 7B, and you look at how in every single part of 7B, and I'm sorry, Jack, but in 7S, you have the fact that 7S tracks the exact same language is additional support for this position. I'm perplexed at Wayne's reading of this. I'm frankly, I have to say this, but I'm perplexed at this entire resolution. I think it is. It should. I don't know why we're having to spend time debating a controversial issue like this when we should be focusing on finding the best budget for the town under the situation. Now, I understand that maybe we need to have, we need to think about different ways to keep the spending down because of the current situation. That's what we should be focusing on, not this. So it's, I'll finish up with this. As far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't even vote. We should vote, send this back to the Rules Committee, and request that the Board of Selectmen remove this from the agenda. Because the
Board of Selectmen it does not have authority in this, and it's not going back to rules. So
okay,
we will be we will have either one of two votes. We will be either voting on the item, or we will be voting to postpone. But there's a whole bunch of things that need to go on. Mike, is there something you wish to add?
Yes, thanks, Jack. And that was a great job summary, Peter. And I just echo, first of all, your practice caveats about practicing attorneys representing, really our own views and our own analyses, and not the RTM and the like. And I reached the same conclusion as you did, Peter, but for different reasons, which I think is the value of having multiple eyes looking at this. But looking at the executive orders 7S and 7I, I focused on 7I as it deals with the budget for the upcoming year by specific terms. And I was struck by a number of things, and I kind of reduced my kind of impressions to a number of observations. And first and foremost, which was the term budget making authority, is not a defined term. I looked through the ordinances, I looked through the executive orders. There's no definition of budget making authority. In fact, that kind of is buried out by just looking at the paragraph itself, as the term is all in lowercase. In my experience, if a term is defined, you see the uppercase is used. As such, not having a definition of this, I think the position, as I understand, being advanced by, I'll say Wayne, is that the budget making authority, he reads into that the Board of Finance. And I think to do so is fundamentally at odds with, I'll say, common law notions of interpreting an undefined term. You look at course of dealings, you look at practice over the years, and to jump to the conclusion that the budget making authority is the Board of Finance ignores the duality of our budget making authority as it relates to Darien. It's the RTM front and center. Our vote makes the budget. We are a budget making authority. There is a duality to it, but to say that we would defer and delegate this responsibility to the Board of Finance, I think basically ignores what should be a very high threshold for making this determination, and this threshold in this case is not satisfied. So that's kind of the sum and substance of just where I landed, Peter, in terms of just reading this. It's the use of the word shall with respect to an object that's very vague, which is an undefined budget making authority reference, which I find is the cause of creating all this mischief here. So that's
Mike, I concur completely. And I have to just amplify that one. I think that one more tidbit here, and that is when you look at the word shall authorize, if I'm correct in line, I think it's the fourth or fifth line, that shall refers back to the legislative body of the municipality, not to the Board of Selectmen. And that's the crux here. Okay,
yep,
there's a
exactly.
comma. And so, but that's it. It's the legislative body of the municipality shall authorize a budget activity. So
yes,
it says in some sense, Mike, that's in my, again, that's even, I'm gonna say more dispositive. It's redundant, but yeah, I think that's one of the best arguments there is.
Mike, can I ask a question? I'm sorry. It's Lisa. Are you an attorney?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
We have one more attorney here before we start with the rest. So I'm going to, which really is upsetting that we have 3 attorneys on our committee. But Beth is also an attorney, and I wanted to hear from the people that have law in their background first, and then open it up. And I will tell you about the conversation I had with Wayne earlier today. But
Jack,
Beth,
I'm now on the line. Jack, this is Wayne. I'm now on the
that's
line.
even better. Super. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm happy to listen.
Okay, well, again, the same caveats. I am an attorney, but I am not representing F&B or the RTM, just my own views based on textual analysis. But I concur with both Mike and with Peter when we're looking back at 7I, paragraph 13, when it says the Board of Selectmen, comma, shall authorize, that's really a carve out from that's a very narrowly tailored carve out from a much larger point, which is saying that the legislative body of a municipality shall authorize the authority. The carve out is only in the event that you've got a legislative body that's a town meeting that for technological reasons is incapable of having a meeting such as the one we're having now. Given that, I think it's very clear that the governor intended us to maintain our authority and certainly not to cede it to the Board of Finance. And every point I agree with Mike and with Peter.
And so before I ask Wayne, and Wayne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that Wayne and I were discussing is the definition of who is the budget-making authority in the town of Darien. And in earlier correspondence that I had even with Wayne and John and Jamie, I went back to the state statute, which would appear to be the Board of Finance. However, I think that the reason why, and we're going to exclude Groton from the discussion on the other RTM communities, what Wayne and I discussed is, and there's no way to know exactly, but it appears that in the town of Darien, based upon the common law, which may be a surprise to certain people, but the budget making authority is actually both the Board of Finance, or in the town of Greenwich, the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and the RTM. And that is what I believe some of the other positions have been from the other towns that did not, that are continuing with the RTM having the vote. I've also requested several people, and I am not an attorney, so I am definitely not representing anybody. But in reading several of the other town charters, because I have nothing else to do in my life, the town charters appear to be very similar to us when it comes to the interpretation. And when you can correct me, do you agree that that is the interpretation of some of the other towns of who might be doing this?
Jack, excuse me, let me just go back a little bit. And I'm sorry I did not hear all the comments. I joined in a little bit late. But I think to answer your question directly, Jack, and I spoke with Greenwich Council just this morning, they have a concern, they have a pushback, I'm not being critical of that at all, with respect to the position that the RTM may be giving up some of its authority. And what they have done in their resolution, which they have on for a vote this evening, is to provide very specifically that they agree with what has been my interpretation of that order, paragraph 13, that the legislative body, which is the RTM, shall authorize the budget-making authority to adopt the budget for the coming fiscal year. They put that language in their resolution. They then go on to say that under their charter, that power has for years been allocated to both the BET, Board of Finance, and the RTM, and they effectively do not want to give that up. What I think is important, certainly what is important to me, is not that my opinion is correct. It has nothing to do with me. What's important to me is that we are abiding by the order given by the governor. I don't want someone to challenge it down the road or challenge our budget down the road, suggesting that we did not follow his directive. We have been trying for many weeks now. I've been on a number of webinars. I've been in contact with council working for the governor on these orders. I'm not being critical of them because I'm not there at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to put together an order. So these orders many times are not drafted maybe as well as we would like, or maybe as they would have been had they had more time, or to clearly express their intention. In speaking with these council, they've indicated they would hope, initially was by last week, then by the weekend, and then now by today or tomorrow, to have an FAQ coming forward from the governor, which would explain in a little more detail what they intended to say, and maybe what they said was not what they intended to say. In the most recent FAQ, which was issued last Friday evening, I believe, they give a little bit of fudge room, in which they say that not what they originally said, which is that the budget making authority, which is defined by statute to be the BET, but they suggest that one look not only to the statute but also to the local charters and practices that have been involved, suggesting that maybe there would be some room to suggest or to identify for protection that the budget making authority is a combination of roles by both the Board of Finance and by the RTM, that they participate in the budget process. And even if it is not clearly stated in the charter, one might be able to argue under that FAQ that the RTM has a role here to play. No one is trying to take away the authority of the RTM. I, for one, great, strong, and long-time believer in the authority of the legislative body and believe in it greatly. So no one's trying to interfere with that. My goal would be to comply with the order so that we don't get challenged down the road. I think if you look at the language clearly, and no one is suggesting that the Board of Selectmen would do this because we are not a town meeting. We are an RTM, which is very different from a town meeting. But an RTM is a legislative body, and the legislative body shall authorize the BET to take certain action. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah,
so I'm hoping to get more of an explanation, more of a intent status from the governor's office shortly.
Jack, this is Bert. May I say something?
Of course.
Now that the lawyers have all spoken, from a regular person, looking for intent. I read it. I read the intent as to streamline the budget-making process in times of uncertainty and in times of difficulties in meeting in person. I do not read it as something that takes away the authority from the RTM, because otherwise we wouldn't be asked to delegate that very item that we're discussing. So that's my view.
This is Peter.
I think if I could just respond to that, Jack.
Sure.
I think the intent is a fair concern. One looks to intent, one looks to legislative history, if in fact the language is not clear. I believe that their intent was to avoid mass meetings of people, not recognizing and realizing that these municipalities, including ours, have been successful in gathering large people together either by GoToMeeting.com or Zoom or one of those issues. So the concern they were attempting to address really is not there any longer. I think their intent was a good one. Their intent was to avoid the spread of the virus.
Yeah.
What would have been better for them to say? What would have been better for them to say would have been the legislative body may consider, not that they shall. It was a bad choice of language there, in my opinion.
Yeah. This is Peter. Wayne, I understand where you're coming from. However, I look at this as shall authorize the budget authority to adopt the budget means we authorize that by taking a vote. That's to comply with this. I agree with you, shall, but shall means we meet in May and we vote. Okay, and again, the governor's the FAQs that came out said that 7I, I'm quoting here, applies only to in-person votes, etc. It said it does not relieve the relevant municipal legislative body, the RTM, from the obligation to vote, record as vote, and follow other regulations. Towns should still use these provisions to hold any budget meetings or the proceedings. So I understand what you're saying, and in some ways I think we're on the same page here. But that I think shall means take a vote. I think this is saying, damn it, the RTM should be meeting to in the normal course through the tech provisions as provided by 7B. And I like I said, I respectfully disagree.
Peter, I would be much more comfortable.
And I also feel that the bigger downside is the situation where the RTM is not approving amendments to the budget, up, down, sideways, or whatever it might be. People can come back and say, well, listen, this budget was not duly authorized.
Peter, I want to hold off on. I want to hold off on that because I want to deal with 7I first.
No
and then I've gone over earlier with Wayne this afternoon, what are the risks of not following this? And I think that that's a separate topic. I want to keep these things as best categorized as we can, because otherwise we'll be talking on things. Go ahead, Mike.
And Jack, I just want to weigh in. I mean, Wayne's comments about the intent you think that is really to avoid mass meetings. Certainly, I think everything I read, comports with that. And I think that, no, we haven't talked about the risk assessment, but it just seems out of abundance of caution for what Peter has said about the role of the RTM historically and the directions of these EOs, that, staying the course and continuing with our practice is probably the safest way to go, because we can do the virtual meetings to avoid the mass meeting criteria from the governor to avoid having large meetings. We can accomplish that with the virtual meeting technology. And it seems the safest course to be to say a combination of our continuing to work together, maintaining the role of the RTM and that of the Board of Finance in the final analysis is best from a risk assessment point of view, because it's really on a razor's edge. If you don't follow the EO, there's one thing you could say, spinning out what the risk. If you do follow it, there's another risk assessment. You end up basically saying, there's no win here. Stay the course and just, you'll be better off for just staying on the course.
Okay, I'm gonna now interact. I'm gonna interrupt or add something to the conversation, if I might. So, whenever I work with attorneys, I like them to tell me not only what their legal opinion is, but what is the risk of not following their legal opinion. And so I sat down and I tried to figure out and gather some information about what are the roles here and what is the risk, both legal and actual. And I'm first going to take it from the point of, let's assume that the RTM does not approve this resolution. So there is, without question, the possibility that the governor could, in fact, come to Darien and say, you did not follow my executive order. And I have two comments first on the first part of it, and then I'm going to make another comment. This governor is not Governor Malloy. If it was Governor Malloy, not only would we have gotten our answer by now, but there's no question that if his intent was to exclude RTM, Governor Malloy would. That's not who this governor is. In addition, from a political perspective, with everything else that the governor is dealing with the stay at home, with the shutdown of the state, with when to open up the economy and that, I think the last thing this governor wants, and I've had this comment from several people who know the governor, the last thing the governor will want is for him to be branded as against the democratic process, especially since, and again, I'm excluding Groton from the analysis, 3 of the towns that have RTMs, Branford, Westport, and Fairfield, he carried in the last general election. His hometown, he narrowly lost by 1,400 votes. The other 2, Wallingford and Darien, actually, he lost by more than the amount that he lost in Greenwich. I highly doubt, since on a legal action, he would have to enjoin the rest of the RTMs, with the exception of Groton, in any action taken. And I don't think, to use the unprofessional words, he has any intention to, I'll use the kinder words, annoy the electorate of towns that he carried or his hometown. And so I do not anticipate, in my own analysis, that the governor will effectuate any action against Darien or Greenwich or any of the other RTMs. So then my next question was, if we do not pass this and we vote it down, we being the RTM, not us here, what about the taxpayer? The issue here is both standing and harm. And the harm would have to be the financial or civil rights. If the RTM approves the budget as presented by the Board of Finance, and the Board of Finance is keeping on the May 14th schedule, then while there may be standing from a taxpayer, if we're approving what the Board of Finance approved, they do not have any economic cost. Therefore, there is no case or suit. If, in fact, the RTM modifies the budget by the lowering taxes, lowering the mill rate, or lowering expenses, because we cannot increase expenses, while there is standing, there does not appear to be any harm, with the exception of if the RTM reduces the Board of Education budget and the Board of Education in turn cuts educational programs or special ed services, then a parent could possibly assert that they have or their child has been harmed from both their rights as well as without economic. They don't have an economic harm unless they're having to supplant those services. So that was just my first analysis. If in fact the RTM chose to not comply with the governor's order. I then said, what happens if the RTM approves the resolution? And here, in my risk analysis, I thought there ended up being greater risk. The first was any taxpayer could file suit that the budget was created contrary to the state constitution or the town charter and request, and this is really a concern, injunctive relief requesting the stoppage of mailing of all tax bills until the matter is resolved legally. In addition, any member of the RTM could assert the same, as well as their rights were taken away, and sue the town, the governor, and request injunctive relief. The injunctive relief is what I'm concerned about, because that potentially will definitely affect our cash flow if it's not immediately heard. I also believe that if anything is taken, the governor is going to quickly come and give us his definition of what's going on, because this isn't going much further. My bigger concern is that if this is picked up by either state or national press and the media outlets, the town has already had its name besmirched for not a reasonable cause, for the shutting down of a testing center, although it has been reopened. But for those who don't know, this made one of the big four British newspapers. The damage to the town's reputation could be significant, and in fact could, although I think it would be almost impossible to prove, harm home values or how this town is viewed. Therefore, when I looked at both risks, I see risk possibly greater in approving it. Not that I'm taking any position here, but I think it's important that we evaluate what the risks are. So I don't know, Wayne, if you want to comment on that. I know I've went
Yeah,
through this
if I could for a minute, Jack, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
I think the primary concern that I have is that whatever we do, we get it done correctly. Because there is always the potential, which is the way I look at it, of John Q. Nudge coming in and challenging us however we vote. And it is for that reason that I've done as much research as I possibly can as to how to interpret this. I even went so far as to look at the Office of Legislative Research in the state of Connecticut, which did an analysis of all these orders and came down with the conclusion that there is a directive for the legislative body to direct the budget-making authority to make a determination as to what the budget should be going forward. I want to be in a position where, if in fact we are challenged on either side, I think there's a potential on either side with someone who may be unhappy or just wants to do it for the fun of it, that we can defend what we do. And that's why I have attempted to get clarification through the governor's office. That's why I'm hoping that the governor will give me some, or give us some clarification of what their intent was, so that we can defend it down the road. Being able to defend ourselves is much more important than who's right on the analysis.
Okay. Is there any other comments on just this part? If not, I'd like to go to 7S.
Well, first of all, can I say something?
Absolutely.
I think that we're taking, like, we're going down layers and layers of stuff, and we really need to come back a little bit above to the top level here. And that, we've got several different opinions on what this means. So, because legal wording can be interpreted lots and lots of ways. So I think that we're always safer if our interpretation stays with the way that we normally do things, because then we won't have deviated and we will have followed almost all of the rules. And so I think that that is a really big, important point here when we're talking about will we or will we not get sued for X, Y, and Z that we don't even know about, right? Because the world's a mess right now. And so the more we stay consistent in our process, then the more we will have solid legal standing. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent a lot of time reading a lot of legal documents. And if you, in most areas, if you err on the side of doing what we have always done and we do it correctly, meaning we get the full vote and we get it documented and yada yada, y'all know what I'm talking about. Then we have to take a stand. We have to make a decision, and we can't just keep going. Well, if we do it this way, this happens. Let's just do it the way we've always done it. We have the means and the ways to do it, and so let's just not mess up the system where we become in a place where we don't know where we're going and what we're doing and how we're doing it. That's kind of how I feel about this. So I think that, I mean, you could read this to say that we are, as the legislative body, we shall authorize ourselves to be the budget making body. I mean, it's a little bit backwards, especially if the RTM is the legislative body of this municipality, then we will be authorizing ourselves to be the budget making authority, which we already are the budget making authority. So it's a little bit redundant. So I think we have really good legs to stand on by just I think we need to just do business as normal. I don't think we need to have any, we need to just, I don't know. Well, one, I don't understand why we can't kick it back to rules. Two, Martin on here says the Board of Selectmen didn't send this as an agenda item. So where did it come from? I'm confused about what it is and why we have to take action on it. Why can't we just do business as usual? Okay.
Are there any other comments? Because I do want to go to 7S because I think there's something in 7F that I think everybody needs to hear about. Anybody else have comments before we move on?
Everyone's seen my comment.
All right. So, in the first time I was ever sitting in a meeting as Chase was buying a bank, the chief legal advisor, that the controller of Chase was in there talking about the contract when the gentleman who I reported to was challenging something. And he said, the first thing you learn in contract law is to read the whole blooming thing. And so I kept on looking at 7S because 7S had and I spent some time this afternoon looking a little further at 7S. And so the first part is 7S is not necessarily dealing with the budget directly. It's dealing with incremental tax. It's dealing with tax anticipation notes, and it's dealing with the authorization of bonding. And in the latter two, which they join together, point 3, it says that the budget making, not getting into who that is, would be required, is limited to 1% of the current year's budget, which would have that be approximately 1.5%, which still might require the RTM to come back to be able to authorize a greater amount on a tax anticipation note, because the Board of Finance, if it in fact bonded $1.3 million on capital requests, would be limited to $200,000 of issuance of tax anticipation notes without going back to the RTM. That's what that says pretty succinctly. But it was point 1 that had me somewhat concerned, because when I originally read it, I first lumped all of them together, and I thought, okay, that was supplemental taxes. But there was a state statute that was referenced there. In addition, it was separate from the latitude on the 1%. So I happened to read what that statute was, and I was quite surprised to find that based upon 7S sub 7 sub point 1, every department in the Board of Selectmen budget is limited. Every department in the Board of Selectmen budget is limited to a 1% increase. And if it's over 1%, they would be required to come back to the RTM and the Board of Finance, budget making authority in this case, for approval of that. Or the option would be that for every one of those departments, you could use either contingency or cash. But there is no contingency to be used when we're basing it on the existing current year's 2020 budget. As such, every department, line by line, would be required, and this is only dealing with the operating budget, would be required to be paid by the general fund funds in order to comply with this by the Board of Finance. The current budget for the operations is over 3% on the operations. It does not get an offset if one budget is down 1% and the other one is up 2%. This isn't an offset. This is a line by line item. I think that creates some problems in the budget and the budget making process. So I don't know, Wayne, if I dropped this on you this afternoon because I only found it and I wanted you to be aware of it as soon as I saw it. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to view it.
Jack, I haven't gone back and read it again. I will say to you, I believe 7S is that order which makes the distinction that should have been made in 7I.
Yep.
And draws a distinction between a representative town meeting and a town meeting, which we are not. It also relates to very specific situations such as bonding, such as additional appropriation. So I don't think the language helps us in terms of the interpretation of 7I.
Well, I would agree that it doesn't help us in the interpretation of 7I, but I do think, and you know, Kate's still on the line, that in reading 7-348, it relates to the department, and it says a 1% increase. So it's not a 1% increase for the overall budget. It's not a 1% increase to the mill rate. It is a department by department analysis, and hence every department would have to be 1% or below in its increase. That's about almost $1 million change. Or that $1 million would have to be paid for out of the general fund cash as referred to in that item. That to me is a significant concern.
Wayne, I think just to reiterate Jack's point is that what his research shows up, and it makes sense to me, is that this provision in 7S points to just how granular this 1% handcuffed is, and it presents some possible budget management issues for our managers, for Kate and for Jen. So that's the word I think of caution. That's my takeaway.
Okay, can I make a comment again from the non-lawyers side of the aisle? What happens if nobody makes a motion on the items we are discussing? Actually, since we're deep in discussions, Robert's rules say that a motion should be made and it should be seconded and then the discussion should take place.
Thank you, Bert. But okay, yes, I agree.
If nobody makes the motion, and I have not heard anybody ready to make that motion. What happens if you don't make the motion and it's not seconded? I think that should end the discussions. And then I have a question, how would that be handled with the Rules Committee or anybody else?
Here's my take on it, and I'm going to answer it. I think that the F&B committee is the sole committee asked to report on this. I think we do a disservice by not doing a vote. I think it should be moved and voted on, and the people's opinion counted, whatever your personal opinion is on this subject matter. I think that trying to do a procedural move would say that I would be responsible for getting up and saying F&B was assigned this. I would still be required to move it as a committee, but there would be no committee report other than to say we didn't move it and leave it up to everyone else, as opposed to providing input on both the majority and minority votes, and then letting people decide at that time that we vote. So I'm not sure that a procedural aspect accomplishes anything that is beneficial to the overall RTM. But it allows me to raise the next point. My concern is that based upon what goes on in 7S, and based upon the fact that it may be, if one of the goals of the town is to have a 0 mill rate increase, it may require the RTM to meet anyway, subsequent to the Board of Finance meeting and recommendation on May 14th, to either approve capital in excess of 1% of the current year's budget, to approve an increase in tax anticipation notes, to, even though it's not necessary, to increase the amount as an example, which is a separate resolution, which we don't have to do, but to increase the potential resolution for a refinancing. We did one number, and I think we have about 15 or 16 million left on the prior refinancing resolution. So I think there might be reason to meet later or move to a date certain. I do not see, while we are still awaiting, or Wayne is still waiting for some greater clarification from those who are working on the governor's office, that we need to have this resolved in the April 27th meeting. We can do this later, but I think that discussion should be done at the floor of the RTM. And I am not proposing that the committee provide. I would like us to actually have a vote on this. I think that that's more important for this committee, but I am open to the suggestions of the committee themselves, members.
Can I say something, Jack?
Why did everybody ask me? Of course, just identify who you are and speak.
This is Lisa. So in following Peter's theory that doing the thing that we normally do, or irises or bites, whoever mentioned it, but doing the procedures that we normally do and going ahead with our normal piece of business and the way that we normally operate is less detrimental to possibly risking not obeying anything that we would normally do, or getting ourselves in a position of not doing it. I want to point out that Tom Byrne, in his note to me that I forwarded to Wayne and everybody else, I hope, said that on April 1st, the governor issued Executive Order 7S, which made it clear that the language used in the earlier executive orders distinguished a town meeting from a representative town meeting. And Wayne agrees with that, okay? EOS S7S stated the legislative body of a municipality or in a municipality where the legislative body is a town meeting other than a representative town meeting, the Board of Selectmen and the budget-making authority of such municipality, if different from the legislative body or Board of Selectmen by majority vote of each body as applicable, may authorize, and he went on. So Wayne responded to me that he agreed with Tom's analysis. Tom further went on to say, there simply can be no disputing that the Darien RTM is a legislative body. That it retains its budgetary authority. Nothing in any executive order has removed such budgetary authority from the Darien RTM. You should be aware that the Greenwich, Westport, and Fairfield RTMs are exercising the same authority to adopt a budget this year that they exercise every year. And he closed in his letter by saying, having worked with Wayne Fox for 15 years, I am certain he would agree with the above analysis. So what are we disputing here?
I'll even try to handle that for you if I could. I have a lot of respect for Tom Byrne. I worked with him for a number of years. I
15.
wholeheartedly, as I said to you, 15, that's a good number. I wholeheartedly agree with the distinction that he was making, which is an important one, between an RTM and a town meeting. They are a town meeting, we are a town meeting. The language was corrected in that latter Rule 7F. It was not corrected and has not been clarified and is not clear in 7I. You cannot take 7S and extrapolate that back and say we're going to interpret that to apply to 7I. You just can't do that. You've got to look at 7I standing by itself, issued by itself, and interpret what the directive is there. I get back again to my concern, whoever it may be, that if we don't do this right, we don't get it correctly done, we don't get it the intent established for us as we have been trying so hard to do, that there is the potential for a lawsuit claiming what we did was incorrect and challenging the validity of our budget. I don't want that to happen.
Wayne, I'm not an attorney, but I'll state my personal comment that if we do
Sure.
it the other way and we change from the course of the other cities around us, if we change from the course of the other attorneys in the other cities, and we take away a opportunity for the RTM to vote in this town, you will have much more fallback and much more blowback than you ever anticipated.
You have, I would agree with you that you have the potential for challenges and blowbacks. You have the potential for that, whichever side we end up on, which makes it all the more important to get it right the first time.
I don't know. So maybe I don't understand. What is the potential for a blowback if we proceed the way we've always proceeded?
Potential for a blowback would be that for Johnny Jones to claim this was the very clear and direct order of the governor. You violated it. Because you violated it, I'm challenging the validity of your budget.
But so did Greenwich and Westport.
Wait. Wayne, I'm going to interrupt you here. Yeah. Well, he may have standing in comment that, in fact, we did not comply with the governor's budget. He has no harm. And so in order to bring a case, he has to also assert that there is harm. With no harm, there is no real case there, and it will be dismissed as quickly as the paper comes across the judge's desk. I don't even need to be a first-year, Lisa, let me finish. I don't even need to be a first-year law student to know what the outcome of that case will be.
Jack, it depends upon the nature of the complaint, who has been hurt, and how they are hurt, and what their allegations are. I don't think you can assume that just. Okay, I don't think you can assume that there will be no harm.
Wait, Jack, can I ask?
Wait, Lisa, stop for a second. Lisa, stop. Wayne, if in fact, which happens in virtually every year, except for one, where the RTM approves the exact same budget that comes from the Board of Finance to our committee, there is again no harm here. There is greater harm that the Board of Finance does their job on a budget that probably would have been completely agreed to, and the RTM does not vote. I'm only talking from a legal ramification. That has more exposure to us than what is typically going to happen, is that working in conjunction with the boards, that we come to a viable budget for these circumstances, and that it gets approved, the same budget that was given. You can't assert harm there.
It all depends upon whose ox is being gored and what the final budget is.
So I'm saying,
But let me just go on to one other point, Jack, if I could. Just go on to one other point. But what I have seen, and I'm not being critical of these folks at all, nor would I be critical of you folks if you chose to do it. What Greenwich has said, what Fairfield has said, is that we agree with what the order says. I don't find anyone disputing the interpretation of the order. They're saying, in spite of that, we're going to follow the guidelines of having our BET Act and having our RTM Act. They're acknowledging what the order is. You have the same right to do that. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying I'm trying to get to a point where there has been clarity made so that we don't have to debate that issue down the road.
Yeah, Wayne, I would just say, it's Mike Heights, is I would not say in spite of it. I would say on top of it, we've added the layer of continuing our course of dealing.
I think that's an argument, Mike. I think that's an argument in our favor.
Yeah.
I want to make it more airtight than that.
Yeah. Wayne, this is Peter. I understand where you're coming from. I respectfully submit that, in fact, I think the frequently asked questions that came out last Friday addresses this very issue, and it says that 7I doesn't apply because it says here, the order applies only to in-person votes of residents or taxpayers. It does not relieve the relevant municipal legislative body, the RTM, from the obligations to vote. It says obligations. It doesn't. It's not a passive or a permissive language. Record its vote and follow all the laws pursuant to Executive Order 7B, which deal with using technical means to have meetings. That being the case, again, I believe that the language of 7I that says shall authorize budget making authorities means vote. That means our may vote. That's what our authority is. It's that may vote to approve the annual budget. And so the word shall there, I agree, it says shall, but it means that we shall vote the way we should vote and consistent with the way we've done things. That's just, I won't belabor it anymore, but that's how I feel.
All right, what I would like to do.
Sorry, Jack.
What I would like to do is have somebody move this, second it, and then take a roll call vote. So we can get on to the other part of our agenda, which is discussing certain things regarding the budget and what's going on there, and have some input, potential, or at least thoughts to the Board of Finance, as well as what I'm experiencing on expanding. We're not calling it the budget, the buddy team. We're rather now talking about it being the Board of Finance, RTM, budget working groups, which I think is more definitive of what it is. So, can I have somebody move the resolution? By moving it, you're not voting in favor.
Is the resolution, are we moving a resolution, or is there an actual resolution?
There is.
Are we moving against it?
No, all right. There is a resolution.
I'm confused.
In order to take a vote, we have to move it, second it, and then we can vote on it. Just because you moved it doesn't mean that you're in favor of it. But in order to get a vote, we have to move it and second.
You want to read the resolution, Jack?
Well, wait a second. This is Martha. I just want to ask Wayne, in his conversations with the attorneys, I mean, How have you explained this? Have you indicated that from a technological standpoint, we do not need to have the mass meetings? I mean, I keep coming back to what in the world would their intent be? And all I can come up with is to avoid mass meetings. And secondly, do you really anticipate that they will come forth with something in the next couple of days?
Martha, that's a fair question. I can tell you in the multiple conversations we've had, and I'm not besmirching the reputation or ability of the folks with whom I spoke. In the multiple conversations I've had with the council that's working with the governor, they have indicated to me the concept for clarification has been approved by the Office of Policy and Management. It is now making its way to the governor's office for final action by the governor's office. They've made it clear to me that the Office of Policy and Management accepts and understands that there is a need to clarify, to show what the intent was. As of last week, they had hoped we would have a decision by last Friday, and they hoped we would have a decision over the weekend. They're hoping we're going to have, in all fairness to them, that we're going to have a decision within the next day or so. And if we get that clarification, that it really was not intended to be applicable to an RTM, then we would all be home free. But I do not have that yet. It is still my hope we will get it very shortly.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, and have they stated the intent was strictly to avoid mass meetings? Have they, I mean, what would be the reasoning for this? I just assume it's to avoid mass meetings, or they felt RTM members, so many would be ill that they couldn't get a quorum. Otherwise, I see, I don't understand what else could be behind this.
I think all of the above. I think at the time this was a new ground that they were digging. They wanted to address it, hopefully with a smaller group, so that a virus would not be spread. I think they wanted to do it in a manner that it could be done more expeditiously with a smaller group. And they wanted to be able to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
Okay.
All of those assumptions are not necessarily accurate at this point in time.
Okay. Can I have somebody move this resolution, please?
Can you read the resolution, please?
Sure. Let me find it.
I don't think you want all the whereas clause, Jack. I'll take it as
Yeah,
a
I
part of the
didn't want
night.
to read it anyhow, but it's behind something, so I have to get it.
I can read it, Jack, if you want me to.
Sure, you have a much better reading voice other than mine, redfish, bluefish. Go ahead.
Well, I'll skip the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whereases and go right to the now therefores. Now therefore, be it resolved that the representative town meeting of the town of Darien hereby authorizes the Board of Finance to adopt the budget for the fiscal year July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. Next paragraph. Now therefore, be it further resolved that the representative town meeting hereby authorizes the Board of Finance to take such action as would normally taken by the representative town meeting at its annual meeting. This would include appropriations for the selectmen's operating budget, the education operating budget, capital and non-recurring expenditures, period. This would further include appropriations for the sewer operating funds, sewer assessment fund, sewer capital fund, as well as the parking lot administration fund and the parking lot capital fund, period. It would further allow for the establishment of a mill rate and the authorization of additional borrowings, period. That's the end of it.
Okay. However, Wayne, as it is currently written, the establishment and the authorization of additional borrowings is in direct conflict with 7S.
I think it's all in direct conflict with 7S.
No. I'm just saying in that one part. I have a problem with that one part. That one part would have to be, since we all want to make sure that we are complying with what your interpretation of the plain reading is, that aspect of additional borrowings are limited.
Jack, that
Now,
list,
it's very specific that tax anticipation notes and capital borrowings are limited to 1% of the current year's budget.
that's why that did not contain a specific number. That list is taken directly from the call of last year's budget and included under the number of what the budget was dealing with. Those are all very specific items under the budget call for last year's
Yes.
RTM meeting.
But the last part of it, of the last lines, and the authorization of additional borrowings is in direct conflict with, because it doesn't quantify that. If you want to say, and the authorization of additional borrowings consistent with Executive Order 7S, subpoint 7, I might not have a problem. But because it
I would
does
not have a
not,
problem.
that additional borrowings authorization would allow the Board of Finance, contrary to Executive Order 7, which we just said we have to comply with, being
Keep
something
two things in
different.
mind, Jack. Keep two things in mind. Number one, that particular line does not list a specific dollar amount, number one. Number two, Order 7S came out significantly later than 7I. So if in fact you want to limit it in that manner, I would have no objection to it.
Okay. Yes, I would definitely ask that
There is
be the interpretation of that.
There is intentionally no dollar amount put in there.
No, I'm not asking for a dollar amount. What I'm asking is
I know that.
that the limitation recognized in 7S has to be included.
That's fine.
Okay. Again, now that we've read it, can I have somebody move this motion?
I move. This is Beth.
Okay.
Thank you, Beth.
Do I have a second? Please, it's not saying you're in favor of it. It just allows us to take a vote.
I second that.
Thank you.
Who's that?
James Howe.
Thank you, James.
Okay. I am not going to do how we voted on the others. Can we have a roll call? Mike, I will vote last.
Okay, let me call out the names I have. It's going to be in alphabetical order. So apologies to those who have names beginning early in the alphabet. Barry, how do you vote?
No.
Thank you. Martha,
No.
Louisa,
No.
Jack, no. Myself, I'm a no. James,
No.
Beth,
No.
Robert,
Bob,
Sorry,
Bob?
no.
Thank you. Iris,
No.
Peter,
No.
Jennifer,
No.
Bill Smith,
No.
Stacy,
No.
Bert,
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
And Lisa.
No.
Brad Patelli's
Let-
here.
Brad, your vote. Brad, are you there? Okay.
He was.
All right. Let me make sure I have anybody else here. I think Brad was the. Oh, Mark is Mark on the line? Adeletta? No. All right. So that leaves Mark and Brad are absent well, they're not registering a vote. So Jack, it comes down to you.
Brad's on.
I'm on. Can anybody hear me?
No, I
There,
couldn't
no.
hear you, Brad. How do you vote, Brad?
I'm picking up the handset. Maybe it's my headset. I'm a no.
Thank you. Jack, I think that leaves you.
I'm a no.
You sure? I got it.
I will tell you that it took me a long time to concern. Part of the reason that I am voting no is that I am concerned that we are addressing this in April 27th, when I believe that there's more information. And if in fact the RTM does cede its power, and my concerns associated with 7S and the limitations of the tools given to the Board of Finance and this town to address its budget of what may be coming up, is why I've had some difficult thought, but I am no.
Okay. Well, with that, Jack, I can report that the no surprise that the vote is unanimous, a no.
Okay. Can we move to the next item on the agenda? And I'll do the first one. I'm going to switch. We do have an outstanding meeting minutes. Mike, do you recall what the date of that meeting was? Since
It's March. That was March 9th.
Okay. Are there any
Before we
correct?
go on, this is Bert. Mike, can you read back what the vote was, please?
The vote was, let me see here. It was 16 noes and one no vote. 16 noes and one not present.
Well, it's no yeses, no abstentions, and 16 noes. Okay, we had a meeting. Are there any? Can somebody move the minutes? It shouldn't be as difficult as the last one. Thank you, Stacy. And Peter is a second. Are there any corrections to the minutes as they were sent out?
No, but I have to abstain because I wasn't here.
Actually, you don't have to under the new Roberts. Be my guest. So Lisa's abstaining. Are there any no votes? Hearing none, I'm assuming that we unanimously are passing the resolution or the minutes. So
that's the way I'll record it.
Thank you. That brings me to a point that John is having, and I think it's worthwhile that the members spend some time listening to the meetings that are going on in the Board of Finance. I suspect that there will be one this week, a special meeting. There is a request that we keep the mill rate at a 0% increase. Now, what has been discussed is because the grand list went up by 1%, the town is experiencing a positive 1.6 million. If we just kept it by itself, because that's what happens because it's larger. The second point is that we did, if you recall, do early retirement on 1.5 million of debt. So we're sitting with about 3.1 million of additional funds going in. The budget was someplace in the neighborhood of about a 1.7% increase. Without question, even though I did send a complaint letter to Chairman Powell that he actually lowered the interest rate, because I hate being wrong, and that makes Joan Hendrickson's assumption that there would be a 50 basis point reduction in the Fed funds rate correct. We will need to and expect the Board of Finance to lower the investment income for the year. Jen thought that they're based upon the most recent issuance of bonds, which in fact was oversubscribed and came with a premium, that some of that premium could be used to pay for the interest of this year, as well as the savings associated with refinancing it, would somewhat offset the reduction of the investment income. Now, that still means that there's approximately a $3 million nut to crack on reductions of budget expenses, both operating and capital. from what was reported, if I'm not mistaken, is that the Board of Selectmen and I know from conversation with Tara, the Board of Education are looking at their expenses. There appears to be approximately 800,000 of current capital requests that we think can be bonded. And if you add on the tennis courts for the Darien High School, which approximates 500,000, that has about 1.3 million of items in capital that can be bonded, which reduces that to about 1.7 million. In addition, there are certain discussions, obviously, that some of the revenue sources get, or the Board of Education get, will be reduced. I am aware that summer school fees that are actually in this year's budget are significantly lower than what was budgeted. Even though the expenses are going to be in the next year, hopefully the correlated expenses to operating the summer school will give some budget relief. On the Board of Ed side, though, there are a couple of risks. Number one, we do not know if there will not be a spike and a return to the pandemic situation in September. Number two, John Zagroski mentioned, and he sits on a private school board, that some of the private schools are in fact discussing whether or not they will be closed for the next school year. If that happens, and being that we do have a number of students, quite a lot of students that are at private schools, there is a potential that we will have a return of students back to the school system. It's typical that we can typically handle return in the high school level. It gets a lot more difficult when we get to the middle school and the elementary school level. And so expenses there could be not what we are anticipating. Also, which I need to mention, which I'm not going to get into great detail, but there is a question of whether or not certain parents, based upon student needs, will not be requesting compensatory compensation, because we do have, and I'm not making comments whether or not this is a valid concern or not, I do not have the expertise. But if I was to give an example, my child went to speech therapy when he was 4 years old. If somebody told me how I had to do speech therapy to my child, I would probably say, because I already speak poorly, that this child is in a lot of deep doo-doo. So there may be the request for people to be able to hire their own people to bring their students back up to speed. That is an unknown amount, but it is a risk that is out there for the Board of Education. Just
Jack,
to
this
mention,
is Wayne. Let me interrupt for just one moment if I could. I don't think you need me for this portion of your meeting.
Wayne, I always need you, but thank you for your spending the time with us.
Not at all. Happy to do it. Thank you all. Good evening.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne.
The other thing that goes along with that is, if one listened to the most recent Board of Ed meeting, they still have not made a decision in this state that there will be no additional, that the schools are going to be reopened or not reopened, although 22 other states, I believe, have already come to that conclusion. I would not expect that the schools will be reopening this year. The Board of Ed has been working on a number of the items, and I believe that they are currently in a position where they will be returning someplace in the neighborhood of 700,000 to 800,000 to the general fund, because they are not hiring substitute teachers, and if somebody is left, they are not replacing them at this time. We are still paying for buses, but we're not paying for gas. every month, we are sending in the custodial staff to re-sanitize and disinfect every school. So there are expenses on both sides. There are expenses on both sides on the Board of Selectmen as well. So in order to come to a 0% budget increase, one is going to have to go and evaluate what the revenue risks are, and that's probably going to be best done by the respective boards, as well as what potential incremental expenses there are. I had a conversation with Dan Bumgardner, and we were talking about the, using the old term, the buddy system. And I know that many of you have moved forward with questions in that. I am getting feedback from at least 2 of the other RTM chairs on who their people are to join. I think it's a very important thing that they do join, because it gives them access to the Board of Finance. And I think that's very constructive, as we found in our own operations. But that being said, I think we need to look at this budget differently, and I think both of the boards are doing that. You know, we were looking at things, what's reasonable. And, you know, there's a lot of things that are reasonable. I'm going to pick on one just because it's out there. It's reasonable based upon the circumstances to put in the new basketball court at Cherry Lawn. And I'm just picking that out because it shouldn't be controversial. However, now when we're looking at these budgets and we're working on our joint budget teams, I think the next question, the most challenging one, is what do we need to have versus what might be nice to have? And I think that's a whole different budget exercise for the groups that we've put together to ask, in working with, on the Board of Selectmen side, with Kate and with Jamie, as well as what's going on the Board of Ed. I do have a request that if these teams do present questions, I've been requested by Jamie that I forward any questions to her. I think that's, my intention was to do that anyway, but on your working groups, if you do come up with questions, please send them to me so I can forward them to Jamie as well, so she knows what has been asked or what will be asked in the future. So I'm interested in certain things, and I'm going to throw some things out there just for consideration. I was speaking to somebody, and I hate the concept of out-of-the-box thinking, number one, because it's cliche, and number two, for most of my professional life, people have been trying to figure out how I end up in the box as opposed to out of the box. So I don't like that saying. But this year, there's about $1 million in incremental pension plan costs. One of the questions might be, and I don't know what the ramifications of this are, what if we deferred the incremental adoption of the pension for 1 year to save $1 million there? One of the other things that I know it was discussed, that of reducing state grants, based upon an article that I have from the governor. He does not anticipate reducing state grants, and in fact, Paul Hendrickson mentioned that all grants on the education side are being paid. So I am not in favor of reducing those grants, only because you know, we might need to be aggressive in our revenue and use the general fund, which is currently sitting at 18 million, which that's our 12% guidance. We have another 5 million in contingency without anything coming back from the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Ed this year. And that moves it up to, I believe, 17% of our total budget, which is what the new guidance is. So I'm curious on anybody else's thoughts of what you think we might want to, or the Board of Finance might want to look at, or other things on how we achieve a 0% mill rate increase. How's that for a mouthful? I'm done. I need some water. Open it up the floor to anybody. I'm hearing crickets.
Well, I'll talk. It's
Perhaps
Martha.
it's
I think we're really in uncharted territory. We don't know when or how rapidly the economy is going to turn around. If it were me, I think I would cancel all but the most urgent of capital projects, except maybe those that are needed for public health and safety. I'm not in favor of bonding a lot of capital now. I mean, obviously we have to keep the Ox Ridge project going, but we really don't know about the future. And, if we defer capital, I just feel that that's the correct thing to do. I mean, to start bonding and deferring pension, I think is, for heavily is really the wrong thing to do.
I will add one of the things that John mentioned, and it has been something that Jim Palin and I have discussed over time. Perhaps John mentioned whether or not this isn't the year that perhaps we do not contribute capital to the accruals we do for the fire engines. And without speaking for Jim Palin, I know that Jim's position is, he doesn't, since these are large items, maybe what we adopt going forward is when it's time to purchase a new fire engine, since these are large dollar amounts, we just bond it. So that's one of the things that I'm hopeful that they will have a conversation on. But it's consistent, Martha, with what you just said.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot
I
of
think
to-haves in the capital. I mean, land use software and things like that, but I think we can afford to put those off for a year. I can go on and on. I can find lots of things that are nice to haves, but they're not essential. Again, I guess we really don't know where we're going here. It may be that it's just a one-year fluke, or it may be extended.
And that was part of the other conversation I think I had with Jenny. And that is, this year, anybody who works the street has already gotten their bonus. The issue is when this market returns to normalcy, because people who work the street are known that the bonuses affected will be the bonuses that they receive in the first quarter of 2021. The layoffs that might be occurring in town might very well be happening in the first quarter of 2001 if the market and the economy does not return to some sort of normalcy. And hence, it's not just fiscal year 21, but fiscal year 22, where we may really find that we're being challenged on. Just a thought that we may have to look at this as if it's a 2-year budget.
This is Bob Lyons. I guess the one other thing I'd add is all money that we're spending on consultants, and I'm just because it's the area that I'm focused on is Parks and Recs, just zero that out. We don't know. Clearly, the master plan that was made 5 years ago could very well not apply to the way we live life going forward. So just don't spend any money on consultants until we get some degree of normalcy. My 2 cents. Sorry.
Irish, you look like you want to say something. Stacy?
unmute. I think
Iris, I think you need to unmute, Iris.
Saying that this is just not, there's nothing about now that's normal. And so I don't think that we can look at our budget as a normal budget. And I think that we have to look at everything, and we have to, like every family in town and across the country is doing, and say, you know what, we need to ground ourselves and regroup, and we can look to next year, or as you're saying, 2022, and just, you know,
Right.
I think we have to look at everything. I think we have to take a responsibility to not just be spending money that people may not have.
Yeah, but I also think that it's important, and this is something on the other side of that. And I've often said that, you know, and I'm reiterating something that both Jamie and Kate have said. You know, the Board of Selectmen budget for the most part is pretty tight. And I'm not sure that this is the year that you want to cut certain services, because I think some of the social services may actually have more demands than what we have experienced in the year. So I think that we also have to recognize what services are going to be needed. And, you know, yes, the consultant superfluous stuff, but I do think that, you know, we want to maintain the services necessary that may truly be required here. And so that's going to be part of the trick that Kate and Jen and Jamie have to go through when they're looking at their budgets. I think they're already doing that. But, you know, I don't want, I would be against services being cut, and, you know, maybe we can't get to a 0 mill rate increase, you know, and this may not be the year to do it, because we may have to do it next year. Just
Yeah, Jack, this is Peter. I want to amplify that. I think we're the best group to help make that happen, though, and to find ways. And I think what I'm hearing from everybody is we need to look at the budget fresh in terms of going forward. But, you know, we can work with the people that we've been working with to date, and you know, with the buddy system, and develop consensus and partnerships as to how do we get to this goal. And that's, in my mind, the best way to get the results we can with the least amount of pain. I think that's what we'd all like to do.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to reiterate, even though I'm sure Kate can speak for herself. I know that the Board of Selectmen budget, they have been working through what's going on and doing that anticipation. So, you know, we may come up with suggestions. I'm not sure that they're not suggestions that they're already thinking of. I just want to throw that out there. So, any other comments?
This is Jenny, only that, you know, Bob and we have been in touch with our, you know, counterparts on the Board of Finance, and we did share a lot, and I think I forwarded to a lot of people on this committee about our approach should be, at least on Parks and Rec, again, to reiterate, no new capital projects. We have no understanding about the impact of what, I mean, I'm even concerned, have we gone far enough in our sensitivity analysis on anticipating deferrals and on tax receipts? So we're going to have to wait and see. And, you know, it's creating a framework of what's really essential. And I hope there's some consistency across, you know, all the boards of, you know, what they feel is essential and what isn't. And, you know, repairs, basic maintenance, a little more maintenance, and then some new projects have to, you know, they may have to fall by the wayside, and it can wait. And in some things, you know, some of these things can wait 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years. And so we have been in touch with Dan and Rob. So we continue those conversations, but try to be helpful where we can.
I do want to also mention, if there are certain capital projects for which, you know, when we're getting into the fiscal year, let's say we find out that there are certain capital projects and the economy has returned and other things like that. There's nothing that says that we cannot, or the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education for that matter, cannot bring something up off cycle, authorize bonding, and move forward on it during the fiscal year. That is an option for those things that could potentially be bonded. So, if we find that there's a turnaround, things can quickly come back onto the plate. Just a thought. So, any other comments?
Just for clarity, because I might have missed it. Is the Board of Ed looking to, looking through their budget too, and in light of everything that's going on? I mean, I don't want to push everything off on the town to, I agree with you. Services need to be there for people that need them.
The Board of Ed is doing certain exercises. Currently, the current exercise is looking at the school reopening May 20th, because that's what the governor has said. They will also be looking at what happens if the it doesn't return. It will also looking at certain revenues that they have. Within that budget is a lot of field revenue, this, that, and the other, that they're anticipating may or may not be occurring. And so, yes, but they did ask the Board of Finance to provide some guidance to them. So while I think that, I don't know if I'm saying this properly, but they are looking at that. In addition, they are going to be returning some significant funds to the town's general fund balance. And at least, not speaking for John, but he would prefer that we keep that powder dry, so to say. So not use what's being returned this year from the Board of Ed towards next year's Board of Ed budget. I don't know if other people have different opinions on that. But yes, they are looking. They're just not.
Okay.
They haven't discussed it.
I just, I'm not as tuned into that side as other members of our committee are.
Yeah, I've been in conversations with Tara on that and where they are and what they're doing. So I know what they potentially are returning and some of the things that they're looking at, but I don't know any dollar amounts of what they've come up with. Stacy, anybody else have a comment to do? Or can we return everybody to teaching their kids and making dinners, which I have to do, or just having a really nice scotch?
Big pour.
Is that a motion? Should we have somebody move that?
I'll move it. I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
7:42, Mike.
I got it. Thank you.